The morning began without much distinction. The light through the small window was thin and gray, and the air in the house felt neither warm nor cold. It was a day much like the one before it, and likely much like the one that would follow. The old man, whose name was Albert, had decided, though not with any particular enthusiasm, that he would spend the day cleaning his attic. He had thought about doing it several times before, but each time he had decided against it, mostly because it did not seem urgent. On this morning, however, there was nothing else that seemed particularly worth doing, and so the attic, by quiet process of elimination, became the day's task. He climbed the narrow wooden stairs that led upward. The steps creaked softly, though not alarmingly. The air grew a little drier with each step. When he reached the door, he paused, holding the small iron latch for a few seconds before opening it. The door stuck slightly, as it often did, but then gave way. Inside, the attic smelled faintly of dust and old fabric. The light from the small window was weak, and in its absence, the corners of the room were dull and uncertain. Dust motes drifted through the air, moving only when the light caught them. Albert stood there for a time, letting his eyes adjust. The space was filled with boxes, old furniture, and things that had once belonged to people he no longer remembered clearly. There was no particular order to any of it. He took a slow breath and looked around. Then, without any real plan, he decided to start on the left side of the room. He bent down and picked up a small wooden box. It was covered in dust. He blew on the lid. The dust moved a little, then settled again. He wiped it with his sleeve. The sleeve collected some of the dust, leaving a faint mark. He opened the box. Inside were a few small objects: a button, a bit of string, and what appeared to be the broken handle of a spoon. He looked at them one by one, then put them back exactly as they had been. He closed the lid, placed the box back where it had been, and moved slightly to the right. There was a chair nearby, missing one leg. He tilted it, looked at the missing leg, then set it back down. It wobbled slightly, as expected. He made a small sound of acknowledgement, though not quite a sigh. He found an old broom in the corner and examined it. The bristles were bent and uneven, but still attached. He tapped the handle against the floor once, then again, to see if it would hold. It did. He began sweeping slowly, starting near the door. Each movement of the broom lifted a faint layer of dust, in the air and then settle again a few inches away. After sweeping a small section, he stopped and leaned on the broom. The progress was not remarkable, but it was visible, at least to him. He moved a few boxes aside to sweep beneath them, though not all the way. In one of the boxes, he noticed a folded piece of cloth. He lifted it out and shook it gently. More dust rose. The cloth was rough and faded. It might have been part of a curtain once. He folded it again, not neatly, but adequately, and placed it on a nearby trunk. He looked at the trunk for a while before deciding to open it. The lock was rusted, but not locked. Inside were more cloths, some papers, and a small tin cup. He picked up the cup and looked inside it. It was empty. He set it back down, then closed the trunk. By now, he had cleaned perhaps one small corner of the attic. He looked at it, not with pride, but with the vague acknowledgement that it was indeed cleaner. He turned his attention to a shelf along the far wall. It held several jars and a small oil lamp. The lamp was dusty. He wiped the glass with the edge of his sleeve. The difference was minimal, but noticeable enough that he paused to look at it. He picked up one of the jars. It was filled with nails. Another held buttons. A third had what appeared to be dried beans. He set each back in its place after examining it. A small cobweb hung in the corner near the ceiling. He looked at it, considered brushing it away, and then decided to leave it for now. It wasn't in the way. He returned to sweeping, though now with even slower motions. The broom made a faint, rhythmic sound against the floorboards. Occasionally, the handle creaked. When the bristles caught on a splinter, he stopped and freed them carefully. After a while, he sat down on a wooden crate. He looked around the room again. The air had become thicker with the stirred dust, and a faint beam of light from the window made it visible. He rested for several minutes, listening to the faint sounds of the house. A board shifting somewhere, the distant tick of the clock below. He picked up a small book lying near his feet. The cover was cracked, the pages yellowed. It was a ledger of some kind, with names and numbers written in faded ink. He turned a few pages, though not all the way to the end. Then he closed it and set it aside. He rose slowly, brushing off his coat, though that only spread the dust around. He moved to another corner and began stacking a few loose boards together. They were all roughly the same length. When he looked at them for a moment, as though unsure what to do next. He found an old lantern hanging from a nail and lifted it. The glass was smudged, and there was a small amount of oil still inside. He thought briefly about lighting it, but decided there was no need. The daylight, though dim, was enough. Near the window stood a small table. Its surface was uneven and scratched. He ran his hand over it slowly, feeling each ridge. On the table lay a few pebbles, a feather, and a key whose origin he could not remember. He picked up the key, turned it over once, and put it down again. The air smelled faintly of wood and age. The sound of a cart passing outside drifted faintly through the window, then faded. The quiet returned. He continued sweeping, now in shorter, slower strokes. Each stroke gathered little piles of dust, which he collected into a larger one near the stairs. When the pile seemed sufficient, he fetched a small pan and brushed the dust into it. He carried it to the window, opened the small latch, and tossed the dust outside. The wind caught some of it, but most fell straight down. He watched it for a moment, then closed the window again. He returned to the center of the room and stood there. He turned slowly, looking around at what he had done. The attic was not clean, but it was somewhat less dirty. That seemed enough for the day. He leaned the broom against the wall, where it stood unsteadily for a moment before settling. He picked up his coat from the railing, though he had not removed it earlier, and brushed off his sleeves again. Before leaving, he looked once more at the boxes and trunks. He thought, very briefly, that he might go through them again another day. Perhaps not soon, but eventually. The thought lingered only a moment before fading. He stepped toward the stairs, paused to close the attic door behind him, and began his slow descent. The stairs creaked again, the same way they had before. When he reached the bottom, he stopped, took a breath, and looked at the faint line of dust still clinging to his shoes. He brushed it off with the edge of his hand, though not completely. Then he turned away and went into the kitchen, thinking vaguely of making tea, though not with any particular urgency. The attic remained as it was, slightly cleaner, slightly less forgotten, under the same quiet, colorless light.